Hi, Caramba. Hello, everyone.
I'm gonna take your seat.
I guess, so I hear we've had some changes in our forms lately.
Oh, yeah.
No biggie. You know, and there's this whole NAR settlement thing and all that. I asked for a little bit of time to talk to you a little bit, because there's been some questions coming to me about open houses and what you need to do at your open houses. My gosh, do I have to make everybody sign something coming in the door? Or, just what's going on? So, and the stuff I'm gonna talk about, this is stuff that between SAR and CAR and Metrolist, the stuff I'm gonna talk about, they have sent to every one of you. I guarantee you, check your spam folders, check your emails, and then read these documents. You've got all this stuff already. But since we have everybody in a big group, I figured it'd be a good opportunity to go through some of this stuff. So, few questions about open houses. Is an agent holding an open house required to have every visitor who enters the open house sign a registration or a login sheet, a non-agency agreement, or a buyer representation agreement? And the answer is, it depends on the interaction that you're going to have with that visitor. But they say ideally the listing agent should have one of these forms signed for the purposes of just clarifying what your relationship is. And so these different forms that serve different purposes, of course, the big one is going to be that OHNA-SI, which stands for Open House Visitor Non-Agency Disclosure. And the beauty of that form is it can also be used as a sign-in sheet for multiple visitors. And it does a couple purposes. It tells them that you are definitely not their agent. There is no agency relationship in there. And it also gives them an opportunity to tell you if they already have an agent. That way, if they do show some interest, you know who you need to work with in order to get that offer to come. There's a buyer non-agency agreement. So if you're a listing agent and somebody comes into your open house and they tell you that they are unrepresented, but they don't want to do a sign-in sheet or anything like that, you can actually give them a buyer non-agency agreement. And that would be the same thing that you would use if somebody approached you about putting an offer in on your property. And they're going to represent themselves. You want to make sure that they've signed a buyer non-agency agreement. But the beauty with this form is you can take several copies with you to your open house. And if they don't want to represent, if they don't want to sign in, you could just fill in their name on that form, ask them to sign it. But even if they don't sign it, according to CAR, if your practice is to hand that out to each and every one of these people, then you are protected in the event they come back later and try to say that there was an implied agency between you and them. Right? So it's good protection. There's also, of course, the BRBC, Buyer Representation Agreement. If they're willing to sign that because they have interest in this property and or seeing others, that's an option. And finally, if they don't want to go with the full-blown BRBC, they can sign the PSRA, which is the Property Showing and Representation Agreement, which is, I refer to it as the BRBC Lite. It's a non-exclusive buyer representation agreement. It cannot be for more than a 30-day term, and it's for only up to 3 properties. So there's those options. Should all visitors to the property sign in using the OHNA? This is the best practice according to CAR. Ask all adult visitors to sign. By doing so, the visitor is acknowledging that the agent at the open house is acting on behalf of the seller and the seller only. It's not representing the buyer in any way. And as I said earlier, they can also use the OHNI-SI to identify the visitor who they are actually working with if they already have any. When they sign the OHNA-SI, is a separate form required for each buyer? And the answer to that is no. It functions as both an advisory of non-agency, and also as a sign-in sheet. What if the listing agent finds out that the visitor would like to create a working relationship with the agent? That's what we all hope for, right? In that case, assuming that the visitor has not entered into an exclusive agency representation agreement, the agent can ask the buyer to sign either a full or a limited buyer representation agreement. But I want to repeat, you always want to ask and get that information. Wouldn't you like to know if they already have an exclusive representation agreement with some other agent? Absolutely, right? What if the visitor refuses to sign anything, but instead only wants to look at the property? Now, I'm kind of thinking you're going to run into that a lot, right? Well, first, whether the buyer signs the OHNA SI or not, they are welcome to come into the open house and view the property. That is not signing that document is not a condition of entering the open house. Remember, you're working for the seller. You know, you have that fiduciary duty with your seller. It's your job to sell that house for them, to give them an offer in. So you want to do anything to facilitate that. And if a visitor shows up at the door and says, "I'm not signing your damn paper," it's not in the seller's best interest to say, "Get the hell out, can't see the property." That doesn't work. So, so of course, they're allowed to come in. But in that circumstance, it's advisable for you, you know, to be very careful in what you discuss with them. You don't want to create an implied or inadvertent agency. And by merely talking to the buyer while making it clear that you are not representing them and you are not their agent, you just have to choose your words carefully in order to ensure you don't create an implied agency. The other solution to that is if you have a flyer that has all the details of the property, you can hand them the flyer and then if they want to inquire further, then you can address that by saying, "Look, I can't go into that into any additional information unless you sign in here, or sign the OHNA-SI." Yeah.
So OHNA is open house non-agency.
Yeah.
OHNA.SI is, what's the SI stand?
Well, they don't have an OHNA. It is, they originally, when they were coming out with their various forms, they had both an OHNA and an OHNA-SI. They got rid of the ONHA. Yeah, thank you. And they only have the SI version.
And the SI stands for?
The SI stands for Open House Visitor Non-Agency Disclosure and Sign It.
Okay, so that OHNA stands, I mean, it operates as a sign-in sheet.
It operates as a sign-in sheet and a declaration that there's no agency.
You have to have one for each person who's involved.
It's beautiful. You can scrap your sign-in sheet and just use this.
Well, so for example, I use an app, so now my app is not in compliance after the 17th, correct?
Correct, unless it is covering the exact same information it's in that. But as, I think was it you that I was talking, Scott had a great idea. Scott, talked about maybe, if you're tech savvy, creating this form on a tablet. So the people can just sign your tablet.
Well, that's like the Adobe Acrobat. And
Yeah.
Just put it right there.
So I use an app for my Open House Pro, but now with this, I don't think it's going to be updated by it. So instead, I should create an Adobe, like Scott's saying, so I can just.
Well, doesn't Command have a landing page and you just complete it right there on the landing page when they come to the open house? And I would assume KWRI is going to.
That was compliant right now.
Yeah.
The update after a year.
They will, I would assume.
I imagine they will, yeah, that I've heard.
All right, let's move on. I don't have a lot of time here. I also wanted to cover, for those of you who have logged into your MetroList accounts since yesterday, you will have noticed that there are no longer any commission fields. And MetroList has added a couple new checkboxes that you can utilize under the terms section. And those two checkboxes are buyer credits considered and buyer credits not considered. And so when you have for your listing agents, when you meet with your sellers and you're taking the listing, there, you'll find there's a new form that's been added to the package. And that form is called an MLSA, that's Multiple Listing Service Addendum. When you meet with your sellers, you're gonna have this conversation, and you're gonna talk about, because there's a BCA also included with that package, which goes over the various ways buyers agents can be paid. And one of the things you're gonna talk about with your client is that, you know, it is very likely that the majority of offers that you receive are gonna include this form called a seller payment to buyer broker, and within the purchase contract, they're going to ask that you pay the fee that the buyer is obligated to pay to their agent. Now, you don't have to commit yourself and say, I am definitely willing to pay that. But if you tell me when as we're filling out this paperwork, that you are willing to consider it, you know, because I might get an offer that is extraordinary, in which case you definitely don't have any objection to paying this. But if you tell me you're at least willing to consider it, we're gonna check this box on this form here, this multiple listing service addendum. This box, if you wanna make note of this, you can find it easily, it's paragraph 5B2. If you check that in your listing paperwork, then that allows you to go into MetroList when you put the listing in, and you can check the box that says buyer credits considered. And then within that term section, you're also going to check the box that says see remarks. And then within your private agent, you know, confidential agent remarks, MetroList sent out this handy dandy form, which I previously posted it to the Circle app. It's available there for you to download. But it talks about typical examples of verbiage you can use in your listing. Like you can put, please call listing agent for offer instructions, which gives you, the listing agent, the opportunity to tell the buyer, yeah, my client is, you know, welcome to, you know, he's into considering possible concessions to pay for the buyer's agency. You can say seller to credit buyer up to a dollar amount in concessions. You notice I'm using the word concessions though. I'm not using the word commissions or compensation. If you use any of those types of commissions, compensation, anything like that, you're going to get a violation from MetroList. That's not allowed because that is contrary to the NAR settlement.
But you can say those words when the agent calls.
Yes, the only place you are limited to putting those is in the MLS or in any website that is attached via IDX to MetroList.
Yeah.
But you can create flyers, put them on there. If you have your own standalone website, you can put it there. It's just not within the multiple listing service.
So I see creating stuff online, I'm gonna ask, is it okay? I've seen that people are putting, you know, key tags on the key, and they would fit like 2.5%,
Hilarious.
2%.
No way.
I've been getting a lot of criticism, is that even compliant?
Actually,
Because it's in a box by MLS.
And it just says 2.5%?
I understand that, but
That's
it's not,
great.
but it's not in the MLS. I don't know, I'd be interested in John's opinion. I don't think that's a violation.
Where is it?
It's by
It's
MLS.
a
It's on the
key,
key
it's a key tag. They attach to the key.
When you open the house, it's in the tag, and
Yeah.
it shows you
It's-
that.
it's-
Oh,
Yeah.
I don't think it's a
That's
violation.
legal, that's not a violation.
I'm just
It's not a-
saying.
The better can help you to know, because you want to call before you show up.
Yeah, and I'd say if you're a listing agent, you need, you know, I mean, there's some listing agents out there that never take phone calls. They, you know, they don't respond to
We
anything.
know those agents.
This is a brave new world we're in, folks. And if you're a listing agent, if you aren't gonna be taking those calls, you need to have somebody on your team that's gonna be available. And at least return messages and all that.
Or put it in your voicemail.
You could put it in your voicemail too, but, I mean, what if you have different properties?
Yeah,
and-
exactly.
I want to comment on this, because a lot of you are gonna be like, hey, they're gonna do 2.5% or whatever. But would it behoove your seller if the offer only came in with a 2% ask?
Right.
Yeah.
You're right.
Wouldn't that make your seller more money? So
Yeah.
just be cognizant, if you just put a number out there, you're likely gonna get that number.
Yeah, right.
If you keep it more vague and say we're willing to do it, you may get a higher number, but you may get a lower number, right? If you say I have multiple offers and we have multiple people, they're probably gonna come in on their commission lower if they really want the deal, right? So just note that, You can put on the keychain, but I'm more like, yeah, we'll consider it, put it with your offer, and see what they come in at. And I can tell you on the buy side, if that listing's been on the market for like 100 days, and they have no offers, I'm asking like 3. Because I'm like, I'm giving you a buyer and you got nothing, right? So,
However,
Yeah.
to make sure your buyer representation agreement either has or has been modified to have that.
Yeah.
Because you can only get as much as what's on your buyer representation.
Are you ready?
Huh?
Is this a good transition?
Got one more comment. Um, some of the things you can put in Metro List, other things. Seller to credit buyer up to 10,000 in concession. Now, it's not saying what concessions means, but that might be, you're not putting a percentage there, you're just throwing that out there. You can't say like 3% commission paid to buyer's agent, that's enough. Or seller willing to pay commission, you can't put that.
And one thing I want to know is there, I would highly recommend, if you're doing some comment like that, put up to.
Yes.
It's up to, because it doesn't mean your seller is obligated to do that. It's just some amount depending on the right offer, right?
Yeah.
So,
Have we also got clarification FHAs are allowed for concessions in the loan? And VA does.
Define your.
I mean,
your
define buyer
definition of
agent
concession.
compensation.
Yes, there you go.
I would defer to the lender. I haven't heard anything.
Yeah, I haven't heard it. I know VA said, but I mean, I don't know about FHA.
Oh, I have not heard FHA, VA has is allowing my.
Oh,
No,
it makes it limited. Yeah, that's limited, 100%.
But be careful how you're defining concession. When you talk about concessions in Metro List, your thought is, well, concessions, that means the seller's willing to pay the buyer's agent's commission. But when you're talking about concessions, outside of Metro List, it could mean recurring and non-recurring closing cost points, or it could mean buyer representation fee, depending on where they put that in the purchase contract.
Now, I think that's important because a buyer might like, oh, I got my closing costs covered, and no, that's my commission.
Yeah, well, they did change the BCA form to actually reference the word concessions on top. All right,
Bruce is doing all the forms. I'm gonna talk about, well, we'll probably talk about, but we're gonna talk about how you talk to your clients about these things. One thing I do want to talk about, we're getting this a lot, if you have a current listing that is rolled over, not in contract, and you have a shared commission in place already. I'm sure we have some of that, right? Okay. We are recommending, say it's 2.5% of the buy side, right? We are recommending that you switch it at the time of an offer. So you say, if they call you, say, do you have a commission? You say, yeah, 2.5 is shared, but just put it on an SPVB when they send it, say it's 2.5 on the SPVB. And then what you do is when if they accept the offer, you do an MT, or you do a modification term on their listing, just to change your commission to the actual what you would make and have the seller directly pay them. So switch it from a shared co-op commission to a seller pay commission.
and that modification, the new form name is MT-LA.
Modification terms listing agreement.
So we don't have to get that by the 17th if we have an active listing? MTL.
Okay, so if you have a listing right now that says I have a co-op commission allowed, you are allowed to talk to other, by default, you have authority to tell them I have a shared commission.
Yes.
So you can say, I have a shared commission agreement with them, where I'm sharing, I will share with you 2.5%. But to memorialize that, because a lot of the other brokerages are not allowing non-car forms with their offers, and so a lot of brokerages won't sign a broker co-op form, even if it's not a car form. Make sense? So what we say is, hey, I'm sharing 2.5%, but actually I'm gonna switch it with the seller. Go ahead, and if you want, you can offer that with it in your offer SPV 2.5%, and I will change it on my side to a seller pay.
But my question is, my existing listing that I have doesn't suddenly become invalid on the 17th?
No.
If I don't get the MTL.
Did you do a DM-LA form?
No.
Then yeah, it's not gonna be valid.
So I need a DMLA by the 17th.
Okay, if you have the DMLA or DMBA,
DMBR.
BR. Those are two forms currently in there. Those forms say the rules are changing. And these are the new rules. You must disclose that to your seller, or if you have a buyer broker BRBC in place, you must disclose it to the buyer prior to the 17th, otherwise it will go invalid.
That's what was.
Because you're not disclosing everything, because in your current listing agreement, it says, I'm gonna put it on Metro List, and I'm gonna display commission, and this is how it's gonna work, and that's changing. And so actually, you need to disclose yourself, that's changing and it's gonna look like this now, right? So you must have that in place, but once you put that in place, you still have a shared co-op commission, it's just not displayed. So you could co-op it, and if the other brokerage, like if it was internal, you could just sell the buyer broker form and just do it shared. But if you're doing with another brokerage, we're all recommending that you move it to an SEDP.
Which, and that stance of other brokerages saying they're not gonna take non-car forms, that's kind of ridiculous because there are areas of California that don't use car forms. They use professional publishing and some other companies.
You see all those forms with like Sacramento County disclosures?
Yeah.
And it has all that stuff, that's not a car form.
Yeah. And it's not up to the brokerage to accept it, it's up to the clients.
But if you talk to EXP clients, they're like, no, they're putting some draconian things on EXP agents that says no non-car forms. So we've had resistance on them signing any co-op commission. So if that's the case, and honestly, we want to move you just because you do want to get in the practice of moving it to where it's a seller paid commission to the buyer broker, or the buyer pays pays the buyer broker, because if you continually operate as a co-op, it is kind of not in the practice, not seen as a good practice for the NAR settlement. Remember, if you do practices that in the future that are not compliant with NAR settlement, then you lose the protections.
Well, and currently CAR has washed their hands of the whole broker to broker compensation concept. They've removed it from all forms. Their legal department has said they will not provide any legal advice when it pertains to broker to broker.
So if there's a shared commission dispute, we can't, like normally we could go to SAR and get it disputed and all that stuff. They will not do that anymore. So that's why we recommend switching from co-op to that, because we won't have any support system to honor that commission split, right? If they say, I'm gonna share with 2.5 and don't do it, and there's no forum, you're screwed, right? So that's pretty much it. So, and I suspect there's gonna be an agent that messes this up and doesn't document it, and they're gonna be screwed out of a commission when they close and.
Right, which actually, I want to get this out real quick. If you're working with a buyer today, you better have a BRBC or one of the other types of buyer representation agreements, because otherwise, when it closes, you may not get paid.
Well, a few things on the BRBC I want to practice. You can't get paid more than what's on your BRBC. So I was talking about that offer, the 100 days on market, 3.5%. I get it accepted, it says 2.5 on my BRBC, you lost your 1%. Goes back to the seller, not to the buyer, goes back to the seller.
Can't modify it.
How do you
You
modify
can't
that?
modify it, so you can use the MTBR,
Yes.
and you can say, for this property at 123 Main Street, the buyer commission, the buyer owes to the broker shall be 3.5%. And you can send that with the offer, and you document it, and that will modify your buyer broker agreement for that property.
Are you required to submit your buyer broker agreement with your offer now?
You're not required to submit it with the offer. However, the seller has a right to demand proof of what your obligation was. In which case, if you're using the BRBC, you would use page 3 of the BRBC. And the most recent version that they updated again last Friday, removed the buyer's contact information.
Oh.
So the last page has, if you look at the BRBC, it reiterates the commission on there, you would provide on that page. Under the SPDB, if you submit one, it does give the right for the listing and seller to request proof of what your commission the buyer is paying. So. Cool. Okay. One thing on there, and I'm hearing a lot of rumors, and there's a box on there that says, buyer doesn't have the money to pay you. Everyone know that box?
Yeah.
All right. It is not your protection. It is the buyer's protection. So for example, if you have 3% on your BRBC and they're offering on home, you're negotiating and they come back at 2%. And you're saying, I'll only take 3, that gives the buyer an out. He says, I don't want you to represent me. I'll just do it myself.
I agree with everything you said.
Yeah.
Except that CAR Legal has modified the form and they have clarified that it protects the buyer. It's the seller paying that buyer's representation fee is a contingency of the buyer being obligated to move forward. But it is also clarified now that it is also a contingency of the broker. Because it enables the broker to be able to say, well, if you can't get paid by this seller, I don't have to represent you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But. Yeah, I understand, but it's really, the buyer can back out and say, I'm not represented, I still want the offer, but I'm not gonna pay you.
Well, then can you just lower your commission and cut the deal and then everybody's happy?
You could, but just be aware of that, it's an out for them. They have a contingency to say, like, if you have 3 and you only get 2, they can say, no, I'm doing this unrepresented, but I want the offer. And you're out.
Well, that ain't it.
That's weird.
Say that.
Well, no, but having that there might help you with that resistant buyer that really doesn't want to sign one because they're afraid about owing their agent this.
Yeah, so you can explain, this is the contingency for you. So if we get in a contract where the seller is paying not a commission I'm acceptable with, you have the right to cancel, and I have the right to back out of that transaction, and you can carry on if you want by yourself. So it gives it both ways.
But you're saying it makes the buyer comfortable that they're not gonna have to. come out of
Exactly.
pocket for
Yeah.
commission.
Yeah, because you can say, if I'm saying 3% here, but it ends up 2%, and you owe me 1%, you don't like that? And because you don't have the funds, it's a contingency, they can cancel the buyer broker.
What's the biggest fear of a first-time home buyer, having to fork out 25,000 or 20,000 out of their own pocket?
If they
So
don't
you
have-
should, so in your buyer presentation, you should, and I've gotten a lot of grief about like, people don't want to sign things. If your value proposition is that form where you're showing 3 homes non-existent, if you're way to get your value to your buyers, I can tell you, you're gonna have trouble signing a buyer broker.
Yeah.
Because your value is, I have a lockbox. One note, so when you use your showings as your value proposition to procure buyers, you're saying, I have a license and the lockbox key is my value proposition to you as a buyer. And I'm telling you right now, if you want consistent buyers and buyer broker are gonna sign, you need to show more value differently, and you need to get into a buyer consultation. We have, on my team, we have had no problem getting people to sign buyer broker, BRDCs, add a buyer broker. It's hard to do it on the 3rd showing of our NSA, and we're trying to do it at the house, right? So,
I mean, I just throwing this out there, there are agents that have this whole buyer representation marketing of themselves mapped out. You've got people like Francine, you've got 100 different things that a buyer's agent does for their clients. That's how you show your value to them. Not just, I have access to the MLS and I can open a door.
It's funny you said, it's actually training yesterday on what an agent's value proposition is, because a lot of times we don't necessarily know how to verbally state what we do. 2, so just to clarify, so say if you do a buyer broker agreement at 3%, as you mentioned, and the seller's like, I'm willing to pay 2%. So do we have to fill out another document saying we're going to reduce our commission from 3 to 2?
Yeah.
That way-
MT-BR.
so you, on MTBR, you say, on this property, it's 2%.
Yeah.
And that way, if they end up canceling, go another one, it falls back to 3, right? But it's, you have to do it on there. Yes.
Under the scenario, let's just say, the buyer, they're short 1% from what you have agreed on in a sense. But you're able to negotiate a seller credit for the buyer. Can they use those funds to make up the difference?
Can they give?
The buyer can always pay you on their side of the settlement statement.
Yeah,
If they use a seller credit to do it, that's okay too.
Okay.
but it has to happen through escrow.
Correct.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So the buyer can pay you, it has to happen through escrow, and if they get any concessions from the seller, they can use that to offset that cost. But just know, if you use a concession to offset a cost that the buyer paying, it could hit your credit limit if you're getting other concessions. Remember, because loans have caps on the amount of credit you get, so if you're half fat commission and you need that $50,000 test credit, corp credit too, it's all gonna lump together and might hit a cap, right?
So kind of adding on to Tomas and then kind of adding what Bruce was saying. So you're saying that these buyer brokers are they're act as contingencies then?
Yes.
So an active contingency on both sides that says, if the commission is less than that, buyer can say, I'm gonna do this on my own without you, get out, continue, cancel, and you can say, I'm not willing to work for that, I'm out.
So then kind of like on Tomas, what he's saying is like, hey, so how would you talk to your buyer, like, hey, they're gonna give me 2, but I'm 3. Would you say there's a potential that I can negotiate a 1% concession later on in the process, or would you want to address that?
So so I've been having conversations with it, I would say, hey, we're at the BRD stage, or maybe they're just asking the question about, hey, I heard that buyers have to pay a commission now, is that true? And I say, well, let's talk about that. Do you have the funds? And they said, no, I don't have the funds and I don't want to pay it anyways, right? Because most people are gonna say, you have some that, we have some that clients like, they don't care, they just want the house, right? So I have people, yeah, they fall for that. Then I would say, let's talk about this clause. If you physically don't have the money and they're worried about it and saying, I'm worried about owing your money, say, look, we'll check this clause, let's go to the clause that says you have a contingency. That means if you end up having to pay me a commission directly, that's above what I'm getting from a third party, the seller or lender or whatever, someone else is paying me my commission, and it's not enough to cover everything I have in this, you have a contingency to back out of this agreement and not me use me as a realtor on this transaction. And they're like, wow, that's pretty cool.
So
Now, having said that, it is my business practice, though. I'm gonna negotiate the best I can to get that covered, and if it's not sufficient to hit this, I'm gonna make a judgment, and most of the time, I'm gonna be okay with a lesser commission if I negotiate it myself,
Sure.
right? You know, when we negotiate an offer, and on a particular one, I will come to you say, hey, we're only getting 2%, but I'm gonna lower my commission to 2% on our agreement for this house so that we can go forward together. And they will say, that'd be awesome, right? Okay, great. Then you've mitigated that whole issue of, I'm gonna have to pay you. Make sense? So
it's crazy.
you're gonna have to practice that discussion. I would put out the BRBC and I would show them that clause and then show them the clause and say, this is a contingency, this is a way for you to back out of it. That you, in the end, if I'm saying you have to pay me, you can, if you check this box, you can cancel.
So it's a petition getting a contract.
What's that?
It acts as our first contingency with getting into contract.
It's a contingency on the BRBC. So it's saying, I can't, like, you know, there's contingency of RPAs, I can back out. Now this is a contingency that BRBC, the buyer can back out, or you can back out. If the commission is not gonna be paid by all, in full by third parties, right? If you check the box, if you don't check the box, it's still. If you don't check the box, the contingency is not in place.
That's correct.
So if you don't check the box, and it says, I don't have funds, if they don't say, no, I'm cool, then they will owe you what they can't contingently.
Which, by the way, if you don't check the box, contingency is not in place, that still doesn't prevent you from making a concession on the amount that you're willing to take down the road.
And you need to have that conversation, like, this is negotiable. And we have that conversation like, you know, look, if there's a house, sometimes the houses, they're desperate, they've been on the market on 20 days, they're willing to do 4% to sell the house. And I'm gonna earn that 4%, we're gonna offer at 4%, so I would change the agreement to accommodate that. And most of them are like, yeah, that's fine. And then I would say, at the same time, some we've negotiated, some will only want 2%, will only offer 2%. I will adjust it down on that for you, as long as it's reasonable and a win-win for both parties. But we'll address that per house. And then they're gonna be like, okay, that sounds good, right? Yeah.
So that has to be addressed and agreed upon when we submit an offer. Because if we're saying, hey,
Okay,
there's 2%.
I'm gonna say two things. One, I say at your buyer consultation, you have that discussion to set up the discussion later.
Yeah,
Well,
When you actually offer on a house and the commission is lower, does that make sense, or higher, whatever?
when you do your buyer concession or when you fill out your BRBC, which needs to be filled out before you start showing houses, you've
Correct.
got to have an amount filled in.
but
Now, if the seller, if you call the listing agent and the listing agent is dumb enough to tell you on the phone, yeah, my seller's desperate, he's willing to pay 4%, you know, for an offer that he accepts.
Yeah.
And then, but you have one that says something less than that, you can do an MT-BR.
Okay.
Increase it to whatever amount you're gonna put on the purchase contract, and then send that over to them.
And I would send, you can even send that with the RPA, BRBC,
Yeah.
and sign at the same time that they, for this house, we're going to 4%.
Yeah.
Make
correct,
sense?
so then if we're saying we have 300 BRBC, and this house is paying us 2, I have to have that MTBR and that a conversation with my buyer that, hey, I'm really willing to reduce my commission to 2 if you're unwilling to pay. When we submit that offer, because we can't renegotiate that after we get a contract, correct?
Yes, you can.
Yeah, you can, it's just like any
So
other.
it's like a seller credit. Remember, you go to recovery, you ask for credit. You can always go back it's part of the contract. So you, if the seller paid, so we had a listing and the agent was incompetent and not meeting deadlines. So we were like, we're gonna lower your, if you don't get this in, we're gonna request, he wanted an extension. We're saying, we're gonna lower your commission from 2.5 to 2. If you don't get this on time, we're not signing the extension. If you want extension, you're going to 2%. on your commission,
And
because the
that-
agent was sucking it,
And that's
right?
perfectly acceptable.
Yeah, because it's part of the contract, right? The seller's literally paying it. I'm saving the seller money. You're gonna make us extend and go longer and incur penalties. I'm gonna cut your costs, right? I'm gonna cut your commission if you suck, right?
I think.
But I'll tell you what, it worked. An hour later, we got all the disclosures back, so.
Just to clarify what Jose's saying is, let's say hypothetically, okay, buyer 2%, but we're gonna write an offer with the SPBB.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah, SPBB, so many acronyms, at 2.5, and if they accept it, then we can change the BRBC after the acceptance, or does the BRBC have to reflect 2.5%?
So
before we make it?
I think I think ethically, it should probably, and legally, it should probably
Be with the contract.
be.
Exactly.
Yeah,
That's
should-
what I'm
So if you're gonna
saying.
say they say we're offering concessions 2%, and you're like, screw that, I'm asking for 2.5.
Huh?
You can go to your buyer and say, they have publicly stated 2%, that doesn't mean that we have to honor that. If our offer is good enough, the seller will just take it anyways.
Yeah, but just.
But I would put an MTBR for
For just
2.5% for that one, and then they counter and say, no, only 2%. Then I would do, okay, I'm acceptable to that, we're acceptable to counter, then I do counter offer, new MTBR, saying back to 2%, right? That makes sense, so.
So what if they don't even counter and take the person's 2? I just lost my client their house because I want a 0.5% more.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a valid
Yeah.
consideration of it, because remember, your duty is to your buyer.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, you know, you have to do that calculus. If I'm asking for more money, am I screwing my buyer on their
Yeah.
purchasing power?
Yeah, so if you're saying I want 3.5% and you're coming in 20,000 on the list price, you need to think about that.
So it gets to be, when you say an offer, you start to address this and have clarification that, I mean, yes, you can get more, but if it's 2, you're probably gonna accept 2 in order to get your offer accepted.
And honestly, I wouldn't go higher unless I'm kind of verbally talking with the
Yeah.
listing agent and we're having some like verbal agreement that I can go higher. That way you're comfortable, like,
One
at least,
thing you
at least they're
always-
comfortable presenting it to their seller, right?
The
That
one
way.
thing you always need to keep back of mind is your primary interest is to the buyer,
Yeah.
not to your compensation.
That's my paycheck.
Exactly. So just note that, yes. And that's why there's like contingency in there, because if there's gonna be situations where they're gonna say, no, it's 1%, and you're gonna be like, no. And that's why the contingency in there to give the buyer an out, because if you're not willing, if you're gonna tank their offer because you don't wanna agree with the commission, it gives the buyer an out, right? So, and they'll go find an agent that can do it at 1%.
Luke
right?
has been patiently waiting with a question.
That brings up a question. Do you think that that's gonna cause situations where they're like, okay, Luke, you know, I'm just gonna call my cousin agent up in the middle of escrow?
Yeah.
And be like, switch.
You can't do it in the middle of escrow because it'll be agreed to prior to escrow. So they could do it in the middle of negotiations,
Well, that's what I'm saying, like,
or
you
the
get a
time,
counter
at the time of
price,
writing
right,
offer.
yeah.
You talk about the buyer saying that to you.
Yeah, let's say we're in escrow, but then the seller sends, I guess. it'd be-
You're not in escrow, you're not in escrow, yeah.
Right,
you're
right,
in-
yeah.
once you go to escrow.
So it's not gonna happen
Even
again.
if it's pre-escrow, if you got a buyer representation agreement.
They're locked
if it's
in.
exclusive,
You're right.
You're covered if it's.
Yeah,
not
if you accept it,
and
and
you've already
They
done.
may wanna change them to the counter before escrow. If
Or,
the seller counters the buyer and their offer.
so say you do 2.5%, they say only 1, and you're like, and the buyer really wants the house, it's up to you at that point, you have to make the decision, right?
My second question is, and I had this conversation with the buyer yesterday, this was my second buyer consultation where I heavily went into this, and I didn't know that it was a back out for the buyer to never have to cut me a check separately, or to escrow, I should say. And I didn't know that, so what I told him, and I don't know if I should have done this, but I said, hey, look, you know, I do not want to stop you from getting a house. And he said he doesn't want to ever have to pay me through the settlement statement separately, you know, whatever. So I'm like, well, you know, we agreed upon a number that he was willing to pay me if the seller refused to pay a commission whatsoever. And we agreed upon that number mutually, but he told me, he said, I don't care if you get whatever percent on the amount. So we put a certain percent on the agreement. And then in the other terms, I basically said, you know, I'm willing to come down from that if need be, to X dollars to a flat
Actually,
amount.
Well, if need be, it's not illegally.
Well, I didn't use that. I didn't use that. I didn't use what I said.
But Bruce and I talked extensively about this.
What term I use?
If you check the box, I do not have the funds, by default, it's a contingency, so you can say like, hey, just so you know, I can back out of this if it's too low for me. But also, I'm willing to accommodate you, I don't want you to stop from getting a house you love. And I wanna make sure I earn what I need to earn to make sure I can pay my family and bills, right? And so, they're gonna be like, yeah, absolutely. So, hey, if we come to a point where it is lower than what I've stated in here, we're just gonna have a discussion about that.
The terminology I put in there, to be clear though, was, I'd have to look at, he didn't sign it, we're not in an agreement
Yeah.
yet. But the terminology I basically came up with was something along the lines of, if seller counters the commission, I would be willing to accept as low as.
Well, I wouldn't go,
I like to.
I wouldn't go with as low as, I would, actually, I wouldn't do that at all. I would do what we've been talking about and just have them check the box saying he can't
Yeah,
pay the commission.
so.
Does
so
it
we
clarify that?
talked about this round and round,
Explanation of that?
and we figured out we don't want you guys writing stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't do that.
You're gonna put yourself in agreements and boxes that you don't realize you're putting
The way
yourself
this
in.
contract form is set up, it has created, it has made you, the agents, a third-party beneficiary to the contract. Meaning you can enforce your legal rights as an actual party to the contract. If you start changing things away from the templated form and, trying to wing it by putting in different verbiage, you don't know what you're writing and how that's going to affect your ability to collect on it if you ever did need to enforce it.
So we want you to check the box and then just have a discussion with saying like, hey, we're gonna have a discussion on every house and it's gonna, and sometimes they're gonna say, we're offering this and it may be lower, and sometimes we're gonna negotiate and then come back lower.
Yeah.
And they may offer, we come back higher. And at the time, we're gonna adjust, I'm willing to adjust the commission to a reasonable amount, that's still a win for me and for you. Depending on how they respond to offer, and they're like, okay. right.
And if worse comes to worse, you don't have to go through with it.
And
You
if
don't
worse
want
comes to
it.
worse, I'm holding the line, you want the house, they're not offering a commission, you're gonna have to come out, you can cancel.
Yeah.
And we can
Yeah.
write that and go with another agent.
So kind of where I think Luke was going initially, so say for example, because you brought up a good point that got me thinking. They need extension. John, you come back and say, Jose, I'm reducing your commission if we accept this commission, this extension.
Yeah.
So would that allow them to say, great, if I'm like, no, I won't go below, Jose, great, I'm gonna go find my cousin that's actually a licensed agent, he will step in and he'll take this for 1.5 with in the extension signed. Where do we stand on that?
Your client, the one that went to his cousin Jim.
Yeah.
He still owes you your full commission.
Yep.
Yeah, I do.
This is already
Yeah.
escrow.
Because
Hey,
you're smart.
John?
You got a BRBC sign.
John,
What if the box is checked that says you can't compensate?
Yeah,
Say that again.
What if the box is checked that says they can't?
and John said he's gonna drop a percentage to get this extension. Like, I'm in a pickle.
No,
Settle up, Austin.
no, because he's still working with another agent to buy the property. It's not that he canceled or went through with it on his own. He went and got himself another agent.
You're saying if he does this unilaterally,
Yeah,
the buyer could say, you're not willing to take that adjustment, I still want the house, I like this counter. They could say, okay, pick another agent. They could say, I cancel the BRBC
yeah.
and then go with another agent.
Like,
Yeah.
it's
But they would have to
exactly-
notice you that I'm using this contingency to cancel the BRBC.
And then you would be out of commission in that
You'd be out.
situation, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I was concerned about that, and we agreed upon that number. And is there a paragraph that explains this out for the buyer in the contract?
No,
That's the problem. I was like, how do we give them confidence?
but keep in mind, the BRBC is a contract between you and your buyer. There's another matter that would, and I don't want to get into the weeds with this here, but the other matter that would come into play is after it closed escrow, you had a BRBC, and then, it didn't work out with your buyer, but another agent stepped in, you might have a procuring cause case against that other.
Yeah,
agent.
so all this stuff we're talking about, there's still a concept in California of procuring cause, that's still valid.
So in the situation he brought up, there would be procuring costs.
Yeah,
You could make a procuring cause to the cousin's agent saying, you owe me this commission, I was the one that actually got it. But that's not a BRBC discussion,
yeah,
that's like going before,
that's,
and arbitrating, I was a procuring cause.
that's not agent buyer, that's agent.
Agent, that's an agent decision.
I see where his point is like, he's in negotiating, he's in a contract. And all of a sudden, oh yeah, my cousin just told me he'd do it for this price.
Because we need
You know.
extension on inspections, but John is saying, hey.
But he
give
can't
that,
do that.
stop it.
It's only if the seller says, I'm paying you less.
Yeah.
He can't just unilaterally do that. If you've already agreed at 2.5, he can't just willy-nilly cancel it because you already have that in place. The agreement's in place.
But if you're saying, I'm gonna now pay 1.5 in order to grant the extension to go to close, like, where do we stand on that? Like, we agreed to 2.5 up front, but now in order to get the extension for our inspections, John is saying that in order for me to grant this, I'm gonna reduce from 2.5 to 1.5.
They can do anything. They can say, give me a credit, I'm gonna reduce the credit, increase the purchase price, they can do anything. I'm just saying that puts it all in the thing, right?
I think Jake has the comment on Zoom.
Jake?
Jake?
Like it's on.
Hey. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think one of the things that we've been really heavily focused on with our crew is the value piece, right? Like a lot of these conversations will come up and we can go really far into the weeds of the what ifs and what have you. I think one of the biggest values you can provide, because I've been doing a buyer consultation for, I don't know, 15 years now, is one is knowing your contracts, knowing all the paperwork, all the new paperwork really well, and not just talking of how they pay you, but actually going through, hey, Mr. Seller, when we get into and we put an offer out, here's how we can strengthen our offers. Here's how this works, and really educating them on the process and providing a ton of information to that. And then also with the conversations that we're having with buyers and sellers and doing the consultation, the after conversation with them needs to be very, I use the 3 C's: clear, concise, and confident. You just have to have it very clear. This is how it works. This is what we do. Nothing has to be decided on today. We can negotiate that when we get into this process, but have it very clear and really have a framework around it so that you can deliver that conversation confidently. One thing that I'm a big proponent of is setting expectations with buyers or sellers right out of the gate, having that conversation up front. I've had situations where even before this, I signed a buyer broker at 3%. They were offering 2.5%. My client said to me, because he saw the value, and said, hey, they're only offering 2%. We're going to need to ask that seller to come up an extra 0.5% in our offer. And so really, when you have these conversations, and even one of my guys, he was literally before this change happened and commissions were stripped out, there were 2% in the MLS. He did a request for 2.5 and they paid it. So you never know what the seller's going to do. You never know. But I think the biggest first step is really getting versed. I've had our partners reading the contracts, reading all the 724 disclosures. I have them do it 10 times and really understanding those forms so that we can confidently explain it. Because that's the biggest thing, is if you're wishy-washy, you're not confident, they're going to question what you're saying and they're going to push back on you. Well, what if this happens? But if you say, hey, this is how it works, and like, hey, I'm a reasonable business person, so if there's a gap here and it's a small gap and we don't have any other way to meet the gap, I don't want you to lose a house. We can talk about that should that come up, but let's go ahead and move forward with this and let's start shopping for homes, right?
And he's exactly right. We have less of these issues. These issues only come up if you're not showing value or not explaining your value at the same time. And you're just trying to use your lockbox access as your value proposition. And then you're having these weird discussions, but they're like, why should I pay you? I don't feel your value, right? In the absence of value, it's always price. It's always price, in the absence of value. So you can choose to be dollar store agent, or you can be a Target agent, right? Or
And
yeah, you can be that, yeah.
it'll help you to sell your value proposition if you sound like you know what you're talking about, which means, I mean, I can tell you from myself now, I'm, getting to be a senior citizen here, and I don't click as fast anymore, so I have to read these documents multiple times. I've probably read through these new forms 7 or 8 times already. But that's what you guys need to do, so you actually know what they say. Because when your client asks you about something, you need to have the
Yeah,
answer.
it should be like, okay, I got to know you, here, fire consult, here's my value. I even talk about what my values are, what my personal values are, and then I talk about what we do for you as a value proposition. And they say, it sounds like we're a good match to work. And they say, yeah, are you ready to talk about the buyer broker agreement? Because we have to sign that now. And they're like, yeah. Then I just go through and I go through, this means this, this means this, this means this, this means this. By the way, your lender said, you're tight on cash, we're gonna check this box, this means, in this situation. But if we come across a situation where the commission, we'll make sure it's a win-win, we'll have that discussion together. And you know what, if you say it that way with confidence, we don't get objections. If you're not saying with confidence because you don't know what it says, or you're not showing value to them, they're gonna question your price. They are gonna question your price, I guarantee it, right? So.
If you want me to put together something around the different conversations, I can definitely do that. Kind of show.
I'm gonna have you actually do a meeting, and, because there's a lot of people requesting that, they're texting me right now. So, you and I, if we can get together, that would be great.
Also, can I just take 2 seconds for a shameful plug for a good cause?
Okay. Go ahead.
I know.
Sorry. I'm on the Cantry Committee with Sacramento Association of Realtors. That Cantry Committee raises money for the Salvation Army. On September 20th at Sacramento Association of Realtors, they're having what's called Queues for a Cause. Basically, they're gonna have a bunch of barbecuers, they're gonna have beverages, alcoholic, non-alcoholic, ice cream, all that stuff. I'll send out the info to someone here, but if you guys would like to sign up, all the money's gonna get donated to the Salvation Cantry Committee, and would love to have some of our people here get some tickets and show up and crush some awesome barbecue. So
Jake, if you could please put it on the circle app once, we get that rocking and rolling for you, that would be great, along with your listing.
I got a plug too. So for those who don't know how to express your value, let alone clearly communicate what the home buying process looks like, what does mortgage one-on-one look like, we have our coaches here, me, Leslie, and other coaches that can help, because I know I train on that. I count on that primarily on what is your value and what is the process, because that's your value proposition. So if you guys don't know.
Yeah, if you're not a coach and questioning how to show values, talk to the coaches. They can help you. Because we are pushing it hard right now through coaching on how to show value, because that's gonna be the number one thing that. Look, we all work very hard to show value to sellers and listings, and you do your listing presentation. You just need to do the same thing with the buy side. You just may not know how to explain it. So talk with agents that know how to explain it, right?
I'd like to piggyback on that. I have a document that literally has 144 things that we do, and I narrowed it down to 77. Maybe 60.
Get overkill. Yeah.
Because it was too many pages, but I'm willing to share that if anybody needs.
Awesome.
Can you put it on a circle,
Yeah.
like
I can.
Taylor does? Yeah, that'd be
Absolutely,
great.
be happy to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And you're gonna see us, that's why we have seller surge coming into it. We're gonna work very much on your actual presentations of how to show value, both on the buy side and the listing side, just so that you can get better, because honestly, if there's anything that we're seeing, what we're predicting in this transition is that agents that are just doing this by default and not showing value are gonna kind of bleed out of the industry. It's gonna be a much more professionalized industry, a much more collegial industry, and it's gonna be more transactions for fewer agents, which is actually, I don't know about you, but I'm actually excited about the change, because I'm like, you're gonna get out all the, no offense, dumb agents out there who are just do this part-time and don't even know what they're doing, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
On a side note, we have some listings that need to get sold. It's 12:30, I gotta go for my team meeting. We're having a new, Regency Park listing hitting the market tomorrow, 3-2 on La Rosa. Open houses this weekend. If you have a buyer that's looking in the mid fives, low fives, please bring them back by.
Are you offering concessions?
Yeah, okay, so yeah, I should have started with, if you wanna get paid by representing the buyers, bring them to our listing. So we also have a North Lake one that's been on the market a couple weeks. It's the next gen model. The NAR is not making them anymore. It's the only resale available. Bring a buyer.
What's the square footage?
36 something, 3650 or whatnot. It's the next gen. It has its own kitchenette, bathroom, bedroom. They can separate entrance and a one-car garage, and it can be rented
They're
out
really
legally for like 2,000. Wow,
Women,
right?
three of them, they're really nice.
So please, and then we have a couple of West Sac, actually no, one that needs to go pending. It's a half flex, low fours. I'm trying to think what else, but if you have other buyers, please come see us. We got listings to sell.
Hey,
Good luck.
can I share one that's coming up today on the market? Sorry. It's 3 acres in Roseville. So it's a 3-acre property, very unique. Swimming pool, 2,000 square feet, single story, 4-bedroom, 2-bath, 4-car garage that's coming up off Cook Riolo. It's a super cool house. So that'll be on 1.2.
All right, can I share listing too? I'm just bringing them up. I have a half-place commitment tomorrow on South Thomas on Glen Rio. It's a 2-2. It is a fixer listed at 350, and yes, I am paying commission.
Is that half plex?
No, you're paying concession.
I take
Yeah.
concession.
You say- That half plex, in a little development that does not allow.
No, are you talking about, I think it's Dexter development, but in mine, no.
There's one development down there that prohibits rentals.
Oh, I'm not aware of mine, it's a
Right,
regular.
no, you can.
Actually, if it's a HOA, you have to check
Yeah,
with
no
HOA
HOA.
to see if there's
Yeah.
a cap.
All right, to close out, because we're already at 12:30, I want you to know, Bruce has posted a bunch of stuff on Circle, all about this stuff. Please read it. Please read the forms backwards and forwards. If you have questions, ask Bruce. If you have questions about conversations, you can call me, you can call our coaches about how to converse with people and show value. That's what we're here. All right, thank you, everyone. Hopefully this is
Thank
valuable
you.
for you. Have a good.
Thank you, Bruce. You guys, the QR code is working for the seller.
Well, I know that even if left a voice read on it. $500.
So, yeah, I'll take it. Find out why I put my- Yeah, that was Good job. We're gonna.
Yeah.
And then you must have.
Yeah.
And then I'll have to. I know.
That may be why my building agent would do. So the buyer will say, oh, it's $0, where I am. And then the agent will say, it's not exclusive.
Okay.
$0.
Oh, it wasn't gonna job. It did fall.
The buyer recommends they're not exclusive. It's pretty common.
So, after that, everybody did.